Hi everyone, it's Philip here, and on June the 19th we are experiencing in New Zealand our first day at level 1 for many a month, which means what? It means that we haven't had any new COVID-19 cases for over 2 weeks, and that our last live case has now been closed as having recovered, so we have no existing live cases of COVID-19. We have come out of this relatively unscathed, all things considered. By comparing to other nations, we are very fortunate, I think. Both an act of the blessing of being a disconnected nation, separated by many waters from many other nations, from the experiences of other nations that our government was able to look at and respond to, and did so in a timely fashion. Lots of elements that are part of our making, and a lot of them that are not part of our making, when we just so happen to inherit all of that and be relatively okay. That said, not everyone's going to get through this the same way. Some will lose their jobs, have lost their jobs. Some have lost businesses. Some have gone through this with a great deal of anxiety and worry about what happens next. And others, have worked the same, whose businesses have either been better for this, or at least no worse. Some have had a chance to reassess their lives, and instead of freaking out, they've been rebuilding and relaxing and resting and doing all sorts of good things. We've all gone through the same basic event, but we are going through it with very different outcomes and different experiences. And that's life, really, isn't it? That's life. That we are all born into a world of struggle and trial and difficulty, but we all respond to it differently, which can have there can be a range of reasons for that. It can be, the good fortune, if you like, of our upbringing or of our temperament, however you want to look at that. Some are just going to do better than others, and some are going to have to face a lot more than others. And who's to blame? Often it's no one to blame. It's just the way things are. So I've been thinking about that in relationship to Revelation 13, because in facing difficult realities can itself be one of the great difficulties. Sometimes the things that we face, if we are able to face them with without being overwhelmed by them, we can find creative solutions to them. And sometimes though, the truth or the reality can crush you before you even get a go at trying to deal with it. And Revelation is quite a confronting book. Its whole attitude is to try and help us see the world in a clearer way. Our default position here in New Zealand, as I'm sure it is in many other countries, is to see the world through the lens of the natural sciences, which is to say that even if there is a sort of a tacit agreement for some that maybe there is something bigger than us, for most of us we're just aware and made aware of the material realities of our lives, the natural forces of our lives, and that's mostly where we live. But Revelation is encouraging us to see reality as a much bigger thing than just that the world that we see, that we touch, that surrounds us, is itself vested with a spiritual reality, that our lives, we are embodied, but we're also inspirited. We are not just flesh, we are also soul. So the book of Revelation helps to try and give us the vision to see the world that way and to see our lives in that way as a means of encouragement. But the reality is too that sometimes you give people too much reality and they recoil. And certainly I think with Revelation we see that. We see some people who have either been taught or have got the impression, or just in simply glancing through Revelation, they've decided that is not a book I want to read. It just fills me with anxiety. But a bit like watching, the news. I just don't want to see any of it. It's just all bad. What's the point? I'm just going to trust God and He'll deal with it. Okay, so there's some sense in that. But avoiding the truth is hardly ever the right approach. It's just that when we are overly consumed by the darkness in our world, the stark and difficult realities, when we see the challenges before us painted in very sharp and stark terms, it can be overwhelming. And depending what you're like and who you are will depend on how you respond to that. Now, some people, perhaps those there might be a group of people for whom, the likes who prefer not to read Revelation or see the news are reacting to others they are observing who are total consumers of the news and immersed in the world's dark news all the time, and who read Revelation with a sense of horror and foreboding and I just hope it doesn't happen in my lifetime kind of thing. Look at that and think, well, if it fills you with that much fear and anxiety, and that you seem to be taking it so seriously, you no longer even have space for faith, that this dealing with reality is actually pushing the bigger reality of God's total and ultimate control out the door. So I don't want that. So we have these kind of two extremes. On one hand, I just don't want to see any of it because it just leads me to anxiety and losing faith, and the other side of, well, I have to deal with the seriousness of this reality, this truth, and unfortunately that leads to, again, sort of a whittling down of faith, because the seriousness of the issues consume them to the degree that they can't see any alternatives, and so they kind of shrink down. And Revelation doesn't want us to go in either of those directions. It wants us to read it and get a decent sense of the realities. In Revelation 13, where I'm up to at the moment, we're confronted with this horrible beast, this Frankenstein monster that the dragon creates out of the seas, and whose task it is to go to war against the saints and to conquer them, imprison them, and to destroy them, to deceive the world as well as it goes, to the point that the world cries out, who can be compared to this beast? Who can conquer it? That they are amazed by this beast. The Revelation wants us to reflect on that, to be aware of those things. But I think it's also aware that, and just as I've been saying, if you confront someone with a truth in such a stark term, you might actually drive them down a dark hole where they're unable to cope with it. They're unable to face it. They become consumed by fear. And that's not a good place to go at all. That doesn't help. So, a couple of things here. What I want to say, first of all, I want to say, I want you to reread Revelation 13, and certainly, maybe even a lot of Revelation, as a political satire. So I'll get to that in a second. The other thing I wanted to talk about is fighter pilots and how they deal with their very risky business. They and how they go about that, which is kind of helps us kind of think about Revelation 13. So let me start with that one then. So I've read a book called Deep Survival, really good. Laurence Gonzales. I'll put his details in the description of the video so that you can look him up yourself. But his book is all about that small percentage of people who, when faced with life and death situations, kind of rise to the challenge and are overwhelmed by it and able to deal with it and survive. What makes them different? And he opens his book with this story about fighter pilots who on aircraft carriers. So they're strapped to rockets with the aim of being launched off this tiny platform and somehow to find the same thing, like in the middle of the night, land on a rapidly moving runway, which itself is extremely narrow and short, going at many hundreds of miles an hour, or kilometers an hour. How do you do that? Any normal person, any extraordinary person, feels a lot of fear faced with that situation, because any small error has fatal consequences almost invariably. The margin for error is just so slim, and so this book, because of course he's talking about deep survival, how do people survive in threatening situations, he opens with this thing, and one of the key points that he's kind of driving home here is one of the main ways that they deal with those situations when these fighter pilots have been briefed about their next flight, because of course they have briefings all the time. There's a lot of dark humor in the briefing. There's a lot of coded language in the briefing as well, ways in which they talk about things which make the fairly heavy environment feel a bit lighter. So they talk about how you count off something, the unfolding of the wings. So these planes have wings that fold up for so they could be stacked on on the ship. And if you forget to put the wings down because you're so consumed by your fear of what's about to happen, you're so focused on just trying to survive this moment, that you forget to engage the unfolding of the wings, which can happen. Here's it talks, talk about doing the 5 potatoes. You think, oh, what's that? So that's coded language for 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4 potato, 5 potato. So it takes 5 seconds for the wings to come down. 5 potatoes. What, 5 potatoes? It's humorous language. It's language that's coded to tell them what they need to do. It keeps it very simple for them. Remember the 5 potatoes. Okay, well, that's not threatening language. I'm not terrified by 5 potatoes. I'm terrified by the fact that if I don't put my wings down, I'm going to sort of go off the edge of the ship straight into the sea. But if I just think, okay, 5 potatoes, it calms you down a bit. All right, it allows you to face the reality that you need to go through certain safety checks to make sure that you are ready for flight, without confronting you with the reality that if you don't get that right, you are going to plunge to your death. You better do this properly. You fill people with fear and they will shut down. And when your situation is by nature terrifying, the chances of you shutting down are very high, and that means you would never succeed. So the language they use has humor to it. The way that they tease one another has humor to it. They're all about the dark humor, helping them not laugh at what they're doing, but laugh through it, to maintain a level of playfulness, not so that they can avoid the reality of their situation, but precisely the opposite, so that they can face it without being overwhelmed. So, translating that into Revelation 13, if you read that with the eyes of someone like a Tom Scott, so in New Zealand he was a political cartoonist, satirist, and I'm sure there are plenty of examples, but Banksy might be an international example of someone who is responding to serious local, national, and even international issues of injustice, or, racial tension, whatever it might be. One of these serious issues that we either don't know how to confront without kind of going into the fight, flight, freeze mode, or just want to bury our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. These guys, Banksy and Tom Scott, what they are really good at doing is understanding the issue enough that they can exaggerate certain points and lampoon the problem, help us kind of laugh to relieve the tension, not so that we don't think about these issues, but so that we are able to think about them without being overwhelmed. Because we need to maintain a playfulness and a creative aspect of our thinking. The fight, flight, freeze, fear response has no creativity to it at all. It has only those 3 very limited options. But the humor that we can engage allows us to think more openly about something. So if you can't find the humor in something, no matter how serious it is, you probably also can't find a way to cope. You will just be consumed by that issue. I just want to leave that with you. If that's true for fighter pilots, it's probably true for you no matter what you're facing. And I think that's what happens in Revelation 13. It's like a Tom Scott, Banksy kind of thing. Yes, the beast is able to imprison and kill the saints, and will be allowed to. But there's some lampooning and parody going on here, because as much as the beast has that power, he's also being shown up as having not as much power as he thinks. He's being lampooned here. As much as the people of the nations will say, who can be compared to this beast and who can conquer it, which is very much the language of Rome itself. Who can be compared to the Roman Empire? No greater empire has ever existed. Who can conquer it? None. It is inconquerable. Who can be compared to the emperor, who is the Son of God and divinely appointed? These overblown statements. And now, of course, the Roman Empire was at the time the most powerful empire, but it doesn't exist anymore in anywhere near what it existed. There is a place called Rome, but it is not the heart of an empire anymore. To say it is a shadow of itself is an overstatement. It doesn't really even exist. It's a lesson of history, of the arrogance and ego of humans to think that they're greater than they really are. And we see that through parody, of course. We create parodies to remind us, to bring things down a peg, and to humble the powers who think greater of themselves than they should. And of course, within the context of the book of Revelation, who could be compared to the beast, and who can conquer the beast? Well, we already know that. The answer is Christ. He is the incomparable one. He is the one who alone holds the keys to death and hell, and to the keys of life. He alone is the king. He and just in the context of Revelation 13, this beast, the inconquerable one, the incomparable one, but he's given only a set amount of time to do his damage. He is restricted. He is under a time span. His boundaries of start and end are fixed. He doesn't have control over that. We have this image of a beast who hurls his blasphemy at the heavens and those who live in the heavens. Why? Because his master, and the one who gave him a power and authority, was the one who only a few verses ago was thrown out of heaven by one of Jesus' angels. He can only throw curses at heaven because he can't get to heaven, because his own master has been cast out of heaven. This is a beast that is a servant to a defeated master. And it makes it more vicious and more dangerous, of course, because being defeated and yet not finished means it's a cornered and dangerous animal, but nevertheless a defeated one. And as much as the beast can conquer by imprisoning or killing us, there is another way of conquering, and this is a way of conquering that's been presented to us throughout Revelation. It is the way of Christ, by trusting God to the end, no matter what that trial might be, holding fast to faith. And if we die, then we rise to heaven. We ascend past the beast and the serpent to go to a place where they cannot reach. We go beyond them to a place in the heavens, at the throne room of God, where the beast has no play, no say, and no place, and can't get to, and can only cast its impotent curses at. So even when it conquers, it loses. So that's just some of the stuff that's cleverly seeded into this little passage. And I don't know what kind of cartoon Tom Scott might do, or Banksy might do, from reading that and sort of understanding well the images and what's going on here. But I can be sure it will be enough to give us a sense that this is a genuine concern and threat, and one that we are able to have some dark humour about, able to laugh through, even if it's dangerous, threatening. Nevertheless, this beast is almost in a sense to be pitied. Not that I do pity the beast, but it's so full of itself, and so having to pump up so much fanfare around its greatness. It's because it's so desperate and has only a limited time, and can never win. As much as it can do a great deal of damage, its damage will be undone, and all those who suffer at its hands will be healed, and every tear will be wiped, and all that is evil will be undone, etc., etc. So kind of aware of the time. I want to wrap this up. So I just want to present that to you, that you go back and look at Revelation 13, look at other passages of Revelation. Instead of reading the Bible as if it's kind of like I'm just going to mine it for the information so I can cobble together an accurate picture of the Antichrist, so that when I see the Antichrist, I'll know how to avoid it. That's one way. It's not my way. Another way, I think, is when you read this information, it's not really information. It's, as I said, it's more a sense of helping people cope with the issues of life and put it into perspective, because the Antichrist has been at work. The Antichrists, according to the letter of 1 John, the spirit of Antichrist is always in every time, until Christ returns and conquers and deals with those things. Read it with a different set of eyes, with a different perspective. What if this is a parody? What if this is encouraging me to cope with reality? Not by avoiding it, not by taking it too seriously so that I cannot even think of solutions, but help me just kind of carry these struggles through my life and allow God to bring solutions, and help us remain faithful as a community, as individuals, till the end. And I think that's what this is about, helping us remain faithful to the end, staying faithful to the truth, faithful to faith and trust in God, and faithful to one another on that journey, encouraging one another and not filling each other with fear and anxiety along the way. Anyway, my thoughts. God bless you. I hope you're doing okay, and I'll see you in a week. Cheers.